Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'll be doing my updated 2026 Senate elections predictions map, obviously for the month of July. We're at the start of the month here, and I'm going to go through every single state and give my updated predictions for how I believe these races are going to go. Okay, so first things first. On the Senate map, there are 35 seats up this year. There are 33 regular Senate seats and 2 special elections in Ohio and in Florida. Heading into the night, Democrats have 34 Senate seats, Republicans hold 31, so we have a long ways to go here. Now, there are a good amount of states that are going to be considered as safe, meaning 15% margin of victories or more. And I'm going to go through these states kind of quickly. First, we're going to go across the country. We're going to go through the states that the Democrats are going to win by over 15 points. The state of Oregon will be more than a 15% Democratic victory. John Hickenlooper's Senate race in Colorado, I expect in this election environment in 2026 to be a safe Democratic win as well. Also, I do figure you'll probably want to see the generic ballot where it currently stands. Currently, Democrats hold a 44.2% lead to the Republicans' 39%. That's roughly about a 5.2% win for the Democrats on this map, as of right now for the general election. Colorado goes safe blue. New Mexico goes safe blue as well, as the Republicans failed to yield a candidate, so that'll be a over 15-point Democratic win, no doubt about that. The state of Illinois will be a safe Democratic win. We're also looking at Mark Warner in Virginia. That'll be a safe Democratic win. The states of Delaware will be safe. New Jersey with Cory Booker will also be safe. Rhode Island will be safe. Massachusetts, Ed Markey or Seth Moulton. That primary is close. General election's not. That'll be safe Democrat. So Democrats, just going off the states that are expected to be safe for them, meaning 15% margin of victory or more, you have the Democrats starting out around 43 Senate seats heading into the election. Now we'll look at the Republican seats, those that are considered over 15 points for them. Idaho and Wyoming both start out as safe Republican for my rankings. South Dakota with Mike Rounds is safe R. Nebraska and Kansas are not necessarily safe Republican. I'll get onto that in just one moment, but Oklahoma will be safe Republican. Arkansas will be safe Republican. Louisiana competitive primary underway between Julia Letlau and John Fleming to replace Bill Cassidy. As for the general election, though, the Republicans should win by over 15 points without much of a problem there. Mississippi, we're going to have to talk about a little bit as well. Alabama should be a safe Republican win. Tennessee should be a safe Republican win. Kentucky and West Virginia as well. And then South Carolina and Florida, like Mississippi, I want to talk about a little bit more. So with the safe seats all out of the way here, Democrats have 43, Republicans have 41. Now we're going to start looking at the states that are considered to be more likely seats, meaning under 15 points, but in between 5 points, like 5.1 to about 14.9, in somewhere in that range. Kind of a wide range, but these are the states that are going to fall in that category. First things first, we have the state of South Carolina, who on PollsMax website, they have it, Lindsey Graham at plus 10 points. In the state of South Carolina, this one shouldn't be too competitive, but Lindsey Graham is relatively pretty unpopular for an incumbent U.S. Senator, and that's going to make this race a little bit more competitive in between being safe and likely R. He won by about 10 points last time. The only polling this far has been Democratic internals, and it shows roughly Graham up about 5 points. And my usual rule of thumb is I shift the results of a internal poll or a partisan poll about 4 to 5 points in the opposite direction. So in doing so, that would put South Carolina with Lindsey Graham right around that likely Republican ranking. Next is state of Florida. Florida, you're gonna find a result in the state of Florida relatively pretty similar. The primary, as one recording this video, has not yet taken place. Ashley Moody, the Florida Attorney General at the time, appointed U.S. Senator, will be the Republican candidate once again. Alex Vindman will likely be the Democratic candidate. For the general, it's a little bit interesting. The rankings are kind of all over the place. Solid Republican, likely Republican, lean Republican. I think likely is more where this race belongs. The most recent Republican poll shows Moody up about 7 points. So again, using the same rule, it would only be about a 2-point Republican lead, but then a Democratic internal poll shows Moody up 3, and that would put her right around an 8-point lead. So it's kind of all over the place where this race currently is. There's still a good amount of undecided vote. On PollsMax and their website, they have Moody winning about 5.1%. I don't think this race is going to end up being that competitive, to be honest. I think it's going to be kind of like a sleeper where the polls are just off by a few points. I think we see Ashley Moody win right around that same 10-point margin that Lindsey Graham did, maybe a little bit under, as Rick Scott won His Senate race in 2024, he won it about 12.8%. So maybe we see it fall under 10 points, but Ashley Moody should hold on to Florida without too much of a problem. The state of Mississippi. Mississippi is a state that's usually a very safe, reliable Republican state, but for some reason, Cindy Hyde-Smith, the incumbent Republican senator, always seems to underperform in the general election. Most of the rankings do have it as safe R. One does have it as likely R. The only two polls have come from the same Democratic pollster, Impact Research, and they show Smith winning by about 3 points. So again, that 4 to 5 point shift here, you're looking around a likely Republican lead. On the forecasting side, they have Hyde-Smith winning also by around that 10-point margin. And again, go back to 2020, she only won here by about 10 points. I think we're going to see something pretty similar to that again. This race won't be too competitive, but I still think it'll be under 15% for Cindy Hyde-Smith. Next, we're going to go to the state of Kansas. I think Kansas also would apply in this category. It's currently listed as likely Republican on PollsMax site as well at 11.4%. In terms of the rankings for the state of Kansas, it has gotten more interesting because Republican incumbent Roger Marshall is facing a lot of Democratic candidates, the most notable being Adam Hamilton, a pastor. For the general election, it's a little in between solid and likely Republican. Only one poll from a Democratic pollster, Tavern Research, shows Marshall up about 8 points. And again, using that 4 to 5 point shift, you're looking around a 12 to 13 point Roger Marshall win based off of that poll, which again would put it in the likely Republican category. Could Kansas get more competitive? It could. It shifted a little bit towards the Democrats over the last few election cycles or so. I'm going to go on the presidential side to show this here. We can look from 2024 to 2012. From the Mitt Romney era, it shifted towards the Democrats about 5.6% from 2012 to 2024. So it's a state that could get potentially more competitive, but overall, I think we're going to see Kansas be a pretty reliably Republican state. The next state that I would put for sure as likely Republican would be the state of Montana. Now, Montana's sort of an interesting case right now. It's listed as 8.9% for Kurt Alme against Seth Bodnar, but that's in a head-to-head matchup. The way the race is currently shaping right now, both the Democrat and independent candidate Bodnar are still in this race, and that's going to make things very interesting. Kurt Alme is the Republican to replace U.S. Senator Steve Daines, Alani Bankhead is the Democrat, and Seth Bodnar is the independent. For the general election, most of the rankings have it as either likely or lean Republican. But the polling currently only from one poll from a Republican pollster, but it does show Alme at 44%. Here's the real issue, though, is Bankhead's getting 25%, Bodnar's getting 20%. Combined, they're getting about 45% of the vote, and they actually do have a little bit more support than Kurt Alme does. But with two essentially Democratic candidates splitting the opposition vote of the Republican, there's just no way this race can be really too competitive with them splitting the amount of the vote here. And we also saw in the head-to-head polls of Alme versus Bodnar, both were very close. A 2-point lead for Alme from before, and now a 50-50 race from that Tavern Research Democratic poll. One example I want to pull up here, I think it was the 2010, or maybe, I thought it was 2010. There was a Senate race. Yeah, it was 2010 U.S. Senate race. I think it was Marco Rubio. He ended up getting like about 48.9% of the vote. Charlie Crist, the then Republican governor who became independent, got about 29.7%. And then you see Meek, the Democrat, getting about 20.2%. What happens is there's enough opposition vote to make it a very competitive race, but with essentially the two Democrats splitting that vote there, it ended up being a very reliable Republican win. And I kind of think that's what we're seeing in Montana right now. If Bankhead were to drop out of the race and it'd be a 1v1 of Alme versus Seth Bodnar, this race would probably start out as lean Republican, maybe even arguably by election day can get into tilt Republican, but for now, likely Republican, a little bit under 15 points. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt one of the two candidates can consolidate a lot of that support, but Montana's bordering very close to being a safe Republican seat if the Democrats and independents don't figure out which candidate to stay in the race and which candidate to drop out. The way it's currently constituted, it's going to be essentially a pretty reliable Republican win. Next, we're going to go to the state of Minnesota. Minnesota, this is a Senate race where it is a incumbent, Tina Smith. She is retiring. The Republican primary, it's going to likely be Michelle Tafoya as the candidate. On the Democratic side, still competitive primary between Angie Craig and Peggy Flanagan. That needs to play itself out. For a while, it looked like Peggy Flanagan was running away with the primary, though most recent Survey USA poll has Craig leading over Flanagan by about 5 points. So very close race. You're going to have to wait and see how that sorts itself out. For the general, though, likely Democratic rankings across the board. Emerson poll has Craig up 7. Even the Democratic Impact Research poll has Craig plus 7 as well. Impact Research from before in July shows about a 4-point lead. Again, Minnesota, it's more of a likely Democratic state and more of a Democratic-friendly midterm year. I think we're not going to see a Klobuchar type win in 2024, but I think we're going to see Minnesota be a likely Democratic win, probably around that like 7 to 10% margin in the state there. Okay, so we have 44 Democrats, 46 Republicans. We have 10 Senate seats remaining to call in this race. Now, these are the 10 seats, and this may shock a little bit, are the seats I consider to be the toss-ups. The way I do toss-ups a little bit differently. Mine is, if I think the margin of victory is 5% or under, that's when you can go into the lean Republican, lean Democrat, tilt Republican, tilt Democratic rankings. But if it's a projected margin of victory for me of under 5 points, that opens the door that either political party could win, given how competitive 5% of the vote can be in a lot of these states. Especially smaller states like Maine and New Hampshire, where there aren't a whole lot of voters, or even Alaska, the amount of votes that actually flip are a lot smaller. So these 10 states that I'm putting in this yellowish color are the states I currently have in the toss-up category, and I expect their margins to be under 5% of the vote. Now, that being said, even though I'm putting all 5 or all 10 of these states in toss-up, doesn't just mean that they're all 50-50 and there's no leading candidate for me in this race. It is. What I'm saying is, even with the races ratings I'm about to assign, there is still the possibility of the opposition candidate potentially winning. So first things first, let's start with the state. We're going to start with Nebraska this time. I feel like Nebraska I usually don't talk about as much, so we're going to talk about Nebraska. Nebraska, this is Pete Ricketts, the Republican U.S. Senator, Cindy Burbank, the Democratic candidate, and Dan Osborne, the Independent. Sort of a similar situation, you could say, to the Montana Senate race. If Burbank stays in this race, it may take enough votes away from Osborne from being able to win. But so far, in the head-to-head polls between Ricketts and Osborne, showed a close race between Ricketts and Osborne. Now, you may be familiar with this name. Deb Fischer only defeated Dan Osborne by 6.7% in 2024. I do think this is a case where we'll probably see Cindy Burbank either drop out of the race or essentially become, non-existent in the campaign towards the end of it. It's going to keep this race very competitive. Now, the forecast ratings here on Polls Max have it at about a 4.8% win for Ricketts over Osborne. It's just barely under 5 points, but this is one of the rankings that I do pretty much agree spot on, that I think Nebraska falls literally just like a few tenth of a percentage point under that 5-point margin. Nebraska is going to be close. I still think the Republicans hold on here. I don't think they're in super big danger of losing that state, but I do think we see ultimately Nebraska go for the Republican, but under 5 points. So Nebraska I'd put as lean Republican. Next, we're going to go to the state of Iowa. Iowa's an interesting state. It's one that's trended to the Republicans a lot in recent years. Trump won the state by about 13 points in 2024, but Democrats are hoping to flip the state and have a very competitive 2026 midterm elections in the state of Iowa. Now, Republican incumbent Joni Ernst is retiring. It's an open race between Ashley Hinton, the representative of the 2nd District, and Josh Turek, the Democrat from the state as well. Now, the rankings in this one are a little bit unpredictable here. 3 of them have it toss-up, 2 have it lean Republican, 1 has it as likely Republican. The polling, we've only had 2 polls recently. They've both been from Democratic pollsters, and they show Turek up by about 2 points and tied in their respective polls. Now, again, using that ranking rule of thumb that I do, about a 4 to 5 point shift, it would put Ashley Hinton leading, but right in between like a 3 to 5% margin of victory, which to me suggests even if Hinton holds on and wins this race, it's likely going to be by a very close amount. Their forecast rankings have it as 5.2% for Hinton over Turek, so a little bit in the likely Republican category. And we've seen close Senate races in Iowa before as well. In 2020, Ernst won re-election by 6.5%. In 2014, when she was first elected, she won by about 8.3%. I think we're going to see a very close race in this Iowa Senate race. I think Josh Turek objectively is a pretty good Democratic candidate for this race, but I do think we see Ashley Hinton hold on and win it by, again, like Nebraska, a little bit under that 5-point margin. So that puts Republicans up to 48. Democrats are at 44. Next, we're going to go to the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire is going to be an interesting Senate race, as Jeanne Shaheen, the longtime Democratic incumbent senator, who was, I believe, first elected in 2008 after she lost the Senate race in 2002, where she ran against the incumbent Senator John Sununu, I do believe it was. So this is where things stand. Chris Pappas, the U.S. representative of the 1st District, will be the Democratic candidate. The Republican side, Scott Brown and Johnny Sununu, are running, Sununu being the former U.S. Senator of the seat from 2003 through 2009, who lost to Jeanne Shaheen in 2008. He'll likely be the Republican candidate. The general election is a little bit split between lean Democrat, tilt Democrat, toss-up, and likely Democrat. For Pappas versus Brown, it seems to be essentially a runaway race for Pappas, leading him about 11 points. For Sununu versus Pappas, though, it's a much closer race. Pappas currently leads about 4.4% over Sununu, and there's a lot of undecided votes, still 11% of the vote undecided. The most recent poll from the University of New Hampshire showed Pappas getting 49%, Sununu getting 42%. Emerson College's poll, though, from before that in March, had it roughly about a 1-point gap between Pappas and Sununu, and then the St. Anselm poll before that has it about a 3-point gap. There's a lot of undecided vote in this race, and it's leaving a lot of uncertainty right now. The rankings here have it as likely Democrat at 6.4%, but I think we're actually going to see New Hampshire be a little bit closer this time around. We saw it go for Kamala Harris about 2.8% against Donald Trump. In the governor's race, Kelly Ayotte, who is certainly not the most pro-Trump Republican, won it by about 9.3%. Now, John Sununu does have the endorsement of President Trump, but the Sununu name, as the former Governor Chris, won the state by 15 points in 2022 and was a very popular governor, or former governor, I think gives the Republicans a strong chance in this race, having a Sununu be at the top of the ticket. Now, I don't know if John Sununu is going to do as well as Chris Sununu did, so I'm not going to give this race to the Republicans, but I do think Chris Pappas has his hardest electoral fight yet, and he wins the state by under 5 points against John Sununu, what's also going to be the closest Senate race in New Hampshire since the 2016 Senate race. That doesn't really say much, though, as Maggie Hassan won by 9 points in 2022, and Shaheen won by over 15 points in 2020. That 2016 race between Hassan and Ayotte was about a 0.14% win for Hassan. The 2014 race before that, Shaheen defeated Scott Brown by 3.2%. So I think we're going to see a very close competitive race in New Hampshire, one that Chris Pappas wins by under 5%. This puts the Democrats at 45 Senate seats. Next, let's move to the state of Georgia. So the state of Georgia is going to be interesting. This is Democratic incumbent U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff. He's facing now we know who the matchup is going to be. He's facing a challenge from Republican Representative Mike Collins, who President Trump ultimately endorsed in the runoff between him and Derek Dooley. For this race, though, most of the rankings have it as either lean Democrat, a few have it toss-up, one has it likely Democrat. Ossoff has a very huge money advantage. He's raised over $81.1 million, but still $32 million cash on hand. Collins at this point only raised about $4.3 million. The polling shows Ossoff at 47.3, Collins at 43, with about 10% undecided. It's currently under a 5-point margin, and there is enough vote, I would say, out there for Mike Collins to potentially pull off the upset in this race. But given the election environment and seeing that every single poll, including the Emerson College poll, which is a non-partisan affiliated poll, shows Ossoff leading over Collins about 5 points, it's hard to say the Republicans are going to win when they have not yet won in a single poll and haven't really come super close to being in first since a TIPP Insights poll from back July and August of 2025. For the forecast rankings, they have it listed for Ossoff at 3.3% over Collins, and I think this might be a shocker to some that this race would be under 5 points, but I really do think it's going to narrow up as we get into the general election. Georgia's a battleground state. It's a toss-up state. It's not really a likely Democratic state, I would say, at this point in time yet. So I do think Ossoff holds on, but I kind of agree with that right around 3 to 4 point ranking that Ossoff will do it by in the state of Georgia. So I think Ossoff wins re-election, but I don't think it's going to be by a very massive amount. Next, we can go to the state of North Carolina. This is going to be an open Senate race where Thom Tillis, the Republican incumbent, is retiring. Now, the two candidates in this race are Republican RNC Chair Michael Whatley and former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper. And the story of this general election has been most of the rankings have it as either lean Democrat or likely Democrat. Roy Cooper in the early numbers has just been running away with this race. He's currently at 49.2%. Michael Whatley's at 40.8%, 10% undecided at this current point in time. Now, here's the trick. North Carolina is a very competitive toss-up state, always is. At the presidential and Senate level, it's been very close, but Republicans usually pull out very narrow victories. That being said, at the governor level, it seems to be electing a lot of Democrats recently. Elected Roy Cooper twice, and now Josh Stein defeated Mark Robinson in 2024, so it's got 2 Democratic governors in a row going here. Cooper clearly has a very strong approval rating, as he's starting out at 49.2% in the polls. Is it possible Cooper wins by more than 5 points in this race? It certainly is. But at only 40.8%, just to give you an idea of that number here, Mark Robinson in the 2024 governor's race got 40.08%. Michael Whatley may not be the strongest Republican candidate in this race, but he's certainly stronger than Mark Robinson. We're going to see the margin of victory narrow up in all likelihood come the general election. So I do think Roy Cooper is favored to win, and I wouldn't even be too shocked if he wins by over 5 points. But I think the 2020 governor's race will be a good example of this, where Cooper ends up winning by about 4.5%, where he got 51.5% of the vote. The Republican force got about 47% of the vote. I think we're going to see something pretty similar to this when all the votes are in. We're going to see Roy Cooper win by under 5 points, but I do think Roy Cooper right now is the favorite in the North Carolina Senate race. He's the likely favorite to hold on and win there. This puts Democrats at 47, Republicans are at 48. The Democrats already flipping a Republican Senate seat. Next, we're going to go to the state of Michigan. Michigan is a Senate race that the Democrats are holding. The Republicans are looking to flip as one of their only flip opportunities, along with New Hampshire. Now, Mike Rogers, we know, is going to be the Republican candidate. He'll be the nominee. The Democratic primary is currently wide open between Abdul El-Sayed, Mallory McMorrow, and Haley Stevens. And the polling has shown a very tight race, but one that Abdul El-Sayed is leading over Haley Stevens by about 2 points. So super close, but Abdul El-Sayed has been leading, and a lot of the momentum is swinging to his side. Now, this is both good news and a little bit bad news for the Republicans, because for a while now, the weakest performing Democrat in the polling against Mike Rogers has been Abdul El-Sayed. And the most recent numbers here, Abdul El-Sayed is now leading Mike Rogers by about 1 point, 43.5 to 42.5. Still 14% of voters are undecided. A few recent polls from Democratic pollsters, Zenith Research and Tolkien Research, are both 5% or under, which again could suggest that maybe once you account for the bias of the poll, it's essentially a tied 50-50 race. Now, for McMorrow versus Rogers, Rogers still holds a very slight lead in a few of the polling averages. Haley Stevens holds a lead in a few of the polling averages as well. It's clear there's a lot of undecided vote left to go here. Rogers, you may recognize this name. He ran for Senate in 2024 with Trump at the top of the ticket and lost to Elisa Slotkin by only 0.34%. So it's looking like we're going to see another very close race in Michigan in the Senate race, but in a Democratic, more friendly midterm environment than 2024 was, where Republicans and President Trump did very well. You sort of have a very close polling matchup, and you could even argue maybe Abdul El-Sayed isn't a strong general election candidate, and I certainly wouldn't push back on that. But given the election environment, I think we see Michigan just go barely enough over that 1 point margin, so it's not going to be tilt Democrat, but it's not going to exceed 5% margin of victory either, given the matchup of Abdul El-Sayed and Mike Rogers. I think we see Michigan go Democratic in between like that 1.5 and 3 point margin of victory is where I currently have it right now. So Michigan in a very close race goes as lean Democrat. Next, we're going to move to the state of, we'll go by Ohio while we're here, because Ohio is becoming a very interesting story, one that's getting very hard to predict. Because John Husted, who's the Republican then lieutenant governor, got appointed U.S. Senator. This is J.D. Vance's Senate seat now that he's the vice president. Husted got appointed. Sherrod Brown, the former Democratic senator who lost his seat in 2024, is running again to try to get a Senate seat back in Ohio. Now, the rankings here, 4 of them have it as toss-up, 1 has it tilt Democrat, and 1 has it tilt Republican. And this has been a very, very close race thus far. One polling average has Husted up 0.4. Decision Desk HQ has Brown up about 3.5%. Race to the White House has Brown up 2.9. Real Clear Politics has it as a tie. An average of all the polling of a 1.5% lead for Sherrod Brown. At 48.6%, Husted's at 47.1%, 4.3% of the vote currently undecided. Now, this is very much a shocker here, especially on the polls max side, where they show Ohio currently at a 0.9% margin of victory between Husted and Brown, only 50.5 to 49.6. Also, I forgot to show Michigan. They have it 2.4% margin for Abdul El-Sayed and Mike Rogers. Ohio is really interesting because we know the polling in Ohio can always be off by a little bit. We also know the state voted for Donald Trump in 2024 by about 11 points and even voted for Trump in 2020 by about 8 points. But for Moreno versus Brown, as the incumbent, Brown only lost by 3.6% and got 46.47% of the vote. Based on the current numbers, if he's at 48.6%, he's already exceeding his vote number from 2024. So Brown versus Husted is right around that potential of the flip, and it's even in the betting odds now. Sherrod Brown is now the leader in this race. So by the absolute thinnest of margins, I'm narrowly keeping it as tilt Republican, under 1 point margin of victory, but I wouldn't be too surprised if by August or September, more polling continues to come out showing Sherrod Brown leading, that this might become a tilt Democrat or a lean Democratic race. John Husted, he's not leading in most of the polls right now. He's not leading in the odds right now. The Ohio being a very reliable Trump state is the only reason I'm narrowly having it as tilt Republican right now. And I'm sure there'll be a bunch of comments saying Sherrod Brown should be declared the winner on this map, and I really am having a hard time arguing against it. Just Ohio being as red as it is my only pushback right now, because man is Ohio really, really close. That's the state of Ohio. Let's move now to the state of Maine, and perhaps the most talked Senate election in the United States. This is Susan Collins versus Graham Plattner. You know about Susan Collins, you know about Graham Plattner. It's going to be a very fascinating race to see here. Toss up for most of the rankings, tilt Republican from one, lean Democrat from another. The polling currently shows Plattner leading about 3.6% against Susan Collins at 44.4 to 48, 7.2% of the vote undecided. Maine does utilize, along with Alaska, ranked choice voting, so the winning candidate must break 50% of the vote on the first round. If they don't, it'll go to ranked choice voting, and then obviously we'll have to wait a few weeks to see how the results come in. Plattner starts out at 48, Collins 44. Again, good amount of undecided vote left. We even saw in the Maine Senate race, when everything is said and done in 2020, the Democratic candidate then, Sarah Gideon, had more of the vote consolidated than Graham Plattner does. We are towards the end of June, beginning of July, though, so obviously we still have like 3-4 months to go before we know how this is going to end up looking, but Plattner's led in most of these polls, and Plattner's scandals is certainly giving Collins a very strong chance in this race. I think it's very possible she could end up winning here. Obviously, we got to talk about the 2020 U.S. Senate race, where Susan Collins ended up winning about 8.6%. She got 50.98% of the vote. Democrat Gideon got 42.39%. Given how Maine votes at the top of the ticket, where we can look here in the presidential race, Kamala Harris got about 52.4% of the vote. I always make the argument that if ranked choice voting was needed for 2020, if Collins was like just even a 0.1% under that 50-point mark, we would have saw her win by probably under 5 points, as a lot of that like 6 to 7% of the vote that was third party probably would have consolidated behind Gideon than Collins. So for the 2026 Senate race, Graham Plattner certainly has his scandals, and that's going to hurt him and hurt the Democrats in the general election. But given it is more of a likely Democratic state in a more Democratic-friendly midterm election, it makes for a very close race against the only Republican incumbent representing a state that Kamala Harris won. It's going to be very close, but I do think it goes to ranked choice voting, and I think Graham Plattner pulls off the win by under 1 point. I think it's going to be probably the closest Senate race in all of the United States, but one I'm narrowly giving to Graham Plattner. This puts the Democrats at 49, Republicans are at 49. Now we're going to move to the final two states in Texas and Alaska. And we'll start with Texas. Texas, this is a Republican incumbent John Cornyn. He lost his primary to Attorney General Ken Paxton, and he's facing off against Democrat James Talarico, who this is a race Democrats are feeling very optimistic about. The rankings are split between toss-up, lean Republican, and likely Republican. The current polling shows a lot of undecideds at 11.3%. Talarico currently leads about 0.3% over Ken Paxton in this race. I forgot to show Maine off in here as well. On their rankings for Maine, they have a tilt Republican. They have Collins winning by about 1 point, so actually we do differ on that. Texas, a few most recent polls, a SoCal Strategies Republican poll shows Paxton leading by about 2 points, which using that same rule would put Talarico up about 3 points based on my rankings. So it's very clear here that Talarico has an early lead in a lot of these polls once you account for the bias of a lot of these pollsters. But at the same time, there's still a good amount of undecided vote left to go. And similar to Ohio and even Alaska, Texas voted for Ted Cruz, for Ted Cruz in 2024, about 8.5% in that race. Now, Ken Paxton, I would argue, is even a weaker candidate than Ted Cruz is, and Trump won the state by 13.7 in 2024. So I do have it falling under 5 points. They currently have it listed as Talarico +7. I think it's much closer than that. I think we're looking around a 2 to 3 point margin of victory. But I do think, one, that Ken Paxton pulls out the win here and is able to barely hold the state against James Talarico. Texas is going to be close here. Paxton's not a very strong candidate. I just think Texas has a little bit too much Republican DNA to ultimately flip here. And this leaves one Senate seat left to go in the state of Alaska. Alaska, this is a Republican incumbent Senator, Dan Sullivan, and he is facing a very, very strong challenge from former U.S. Representative Mary Peltola. Now, the polling in the rankings toss up from 3 out of the 6 and lean Republican from 3 out of the 6. There hasn't been a whole lot of polling. The only polling that's been done has been by Alaska Survey Research, who has Peltola at 49%, Sullivan at 44%, 7% undecided. Things are going to be really interesting here because Peltola clearly has a lead right now in the early polling. The rankings still lean Republican to toss up, show this race is very competitive as well. I would love to see, honestly, another poll that's not Alaska Survey Research do a poll here. Not that I'm disputing them. I mean, I've seen some stuff about them saying that maybe they're not, like, they're a little bit Democratic biased or not. I haven't found anything 100% to confirm that. So I would like to see a different poll do it, maybe like an Emerson poll, just to be clear here. But Peltola is right around reaching that 50% mark. Alaska is more of a likely Republican state than a toss-up state, though. Voted for Trump by 13 points in 2024. The Senate race was a special case in 2022 with Murkowski and Tishbaka, but Sullivan won in 2020 by about 12.7%. It's going to be very close because Mary Peltola is running, no doubt about that. She has a very real chance to win here. It voted blue in 2022 about 9.9% against Sarah Palin. It voted red for Nick Begich only by about 2 points in that race in 2024. So it's going to be very, very tight of a race. The Senate forecast currently has Sullivan leading about 2.4%. I think actually it goes to ranked choice voting again. I think it falls under 1 point, like Maine, like Ohio. I'm narrowly giving Dan Sullivan the win here. And I think this is a flip from my prediction last month where I had Peltola winning. I just think a little bit more of that vote's going to consolidate behind Dan Sullivan in this race, but really, really close in Alaska. So right now, my prediction for the month of July is Republicans to win 51 Senate seats, Democrats to win 49. We'll see how this progresses over July heading into August once we'll do our next prediction. But a lot of very close calls in the Senate map, one where both the Democrats and Republicans are certainly capable of winning Senate control. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Leave them in the comment section down below. Who do you think will win the Senate in 2026 in the midterms? For now, though, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos from me going forward. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.